Hey, my name's Bruce Snell. I'm with BSG International, and today we're going to talk about Class 16, which is continuous improvement and delegation of self and action. What we're going to be doing here is looking at, as we're internally within this organization, we're still really focusing in on part 4 right now, which is the personal and preventive and corrective action. So we're going to look at this of how in the world, with all these things that are happening, whether it's to deal with our coworker, our boss, or problems that we might have at home or whatever, but what are these things that we can focus on internally to kind of help our job and our workplace move a little smoother? Because we all hit these bumps every once in a while. So what we're going to do is talk about some things from a personal and a characteristics that we need to focus on, not only for ourselves, but also too as we're dealing with our coworkers. Now this is very important, and we're going to talk about looking at what we call our quality characteristics. We want everybody here to really think about what we've discussed over this ABS program here, is that really our people are good people. Let's look at page 1, and what it's saying is our base character. What is a base character? We're saying it's quality of people, the combination of emotional, intellectual, and moral qualities. Now, what's really kind of fascinating to me is that I do a lot of speaking we basically have corporate clients that provide us to speak for high schools and colleges. And it's real interesting, especially at the college level, it seems like we don't have the reinforcement of the values and the ethics. And in fact, when we have the students come, it's really interesting that they're just so pumped, and our generation that are out there, like my kids' age, they're all really scammering for leadership, and they're also searching for values and ethics. It seems like over the last 20 or 30 years, we kind of negotiated ourselves out of there. And when we're saying with the base character, we're saying here that most of our people are good people, and we're doing the best that we can with what we have. And we have to remember that. And we also, too, have to be the bigger person. And as you see, as we start dealing with these issues and this conflict internally within the organization, this is where we're saying that we're, in a sense, going to have to be the bigger person in this thing, because if we are waiting for someone else to kind of step up, chances are we're going to be left standing there because, again, in effect, the awareness. A lot of us don't understand of what's happening to us or how we're bringing on a lot of these tragedies and issues that are surrounding us. Now, we've also talked about the base values. If you look at the base values, it's the foundation and rules that determine conduct and habit. And we're saying which in turn affect all employees' welfare, a foundation of good decisions. If we look at the 2 rules, do what's morally and ethically correct and treat everybody as you want to be treated, this is what we're saying. If you follow these rules, you're going to make a good decision. And what's so interesting is that, example, as we speak to high schools, you see some of the kids that are having struggles with these issues. What we're saying here is that you might not win today, or that person might get over on you, but every time that you kind of take it on the chin and are the bigger person, you're building another and putting another block in your character. So as we're building and looking at this, even though we might not necessarily win, or they might be mean to us and they might get an advantage on us, is that every time that we're the bigger person, we're building our integrity. And believe it or not, people around you will see this. And as you are taking control of yourself, that in turn will start taking control of your base work center, that you'll be able to address a lot of issues internally without getting them to conflict. Now, y'all remember what we've talked about. How do we address conflict? We usually address it 2 ways, and that is we don't or with conflict. And it's the quality character is that myself, looking at me, looking at each of us. We don't really slow down enough to kind of look at all these things that are happening to us or what we're all about. We get so caught up in our day-to-day action of getting to work, going to work, and basically coming home and then getting it up, doing it again. And it says, having the faith and trust in oneself and others to endure hardships and or inconvenience without complaint and with forgiveness. What we're saying here is that when we are able to forgive, forget, and forge on, is that we're able to discount and move away from that negative thing that's affecting us. Because if we don't and we keep focusing on that, that negative either person or that event is going to drag us down and take our energy and effort out of us. And if you look at it, do you think that affects as we leave work and go home, or if we're at home and go to work? Yes, it does. It affects it. We can't turn it on and off. So what we're saying here is that if nothing else, we have to have faith and trust in ourselves and our co-workers. We kind of get bombarded daily with all this negative influence and stuff in the media, and we're having all this stuff that is telling us that, you know, we can't be compassionate, we cannot give or help because people are going to take advantage of us. And it seems like all we're seeing out there in the reinforcement is all the bad stuff that's happening. So whether you realize it or not, that stuff's registering in the back of your mind that, hey, I'm looking at that person and chances are they're going to try to get over them. So we become very cynical and very suspicious of everybody. And we almost to a point stop trusting. And we're not saying like be naive, but what we are saying is that we got to have faith and trust, not only in ourselves and our decisions, but also too in our co-workers and also in our family and in our communities. And we're looking at the quality character. We're really trying to finish up that says the patience. We need to develop that patience internally and look at having tolerance and understanding without malice of oneself and others. If you look at this, the patience is really key to a lot of things. Look at it last time that we had some conflict internally within the organization. What happens? You elevate, you get angry. What's the other person do? They're going to top you. And pretty soon we're sitting out there wrestling around in the hallway and we're not even addressing the issue anymore. And then what happens? Then all of a sudden we don't talk to each other for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and then all of a sudden we got people going around to different people telling me to talk to you, to talk to him, because we can't talk to that person because we're not getting along. And if you look at it, the majority of us don't have the personal skills to address these issues. And are these issues important? Yes, they are. We're saying here, how productive is basically someone that's angry at almost everybody else, and including the 1%, and how productive is that? It's not productive. And we're not having the skills, especially if that person is dealing with some insecurity issues, they continually dig in tougher, and then the wall gets bigger and the problem gets bigger, and then eventually it'll explode. And what happens, I go into the CEO, the president, or the department head's office, and they're in there about ready to go to fisticuffs because we haven't addressed the issues. We're going to look at some ways that we can do and implement some very simple processes compared to what we've gone over. We've gone over a lot of stuff in this ABS program here. There's some little simple things that we can do to make sure that we're agreeing on, and especially if we're having some issues with coworkers or a boss, that will help us kind of make sure we all understand where we're going. The patience and the tolerance without malice. What we're saying is if we got an issue and we're either right or we're wrong or whatever, let's just move on. And let's never do nothing internally to hurt somebody. And that's what we're talking about with the malice. And the self-control. This is what's so devastating when we're dealing internally within the organization with the 1%, because they have basically hardly any self-control, and not only less than the self-control, they have less self-esteem, because they're dealing with some internal issues that they're dealing with, whether you realize it or not. They're dealing with stuff the best way that they can. And when we're dealing with these insecurities, there's a point of where they get into the manipulation. And so what happens is we're dealing with these folks, and remember, a lot of these folks, the 1%, don't even have a problem with just an outright lie. And most of us, we kind of get white-knuckled even if we're stretching the truth a little bit. So what we've gone is that we went over the base character, the base values, and the quality character. We want you to really think about that. Because we use that definition of quality all over the place. And they're going, well, this guy's not quality, that guy's not quality. And what we're saying is, A quality person is in here. Now, if that person is doing the best with what they got, how in the world can you say they're non-quality? And that's the same thing about our people. The majority, 99%, are doing the best that they can with what they have. This is where we have to have that compassion and all these things that we're going to be talking about and be the bigger person and turn around and walk off. Because what you're going to see is that whether you realize it or not, these conflicts and these issues that we're dealing with, they're stacking up back there if we can't release and let them go. Let's look at D now. Let's go down to the base character and look at the positive, meaning myself, and then the positive to others, and then what we call the baseless character. And reason we say under that thing, it says the negative and positive 1 to 20%. Because remember what we talked about is that the negative, the 1% affect 5% with the same negative characteristics, meaning that if I'm a bad guy and if I'm negative and I've got 5 negative characteristics, I'm going to affect 5% of the population in the workplace with the same 5 negative characteristics. And then we're saying that 5% is going to affect 20%. Now the 20% might only have one of those things, one of those negative characteristics out of those 5. So in effect, what that 1% is doing, it's running around in an informal organization wreaking havoc with your people. And seeing this is the disgusting thing that a lot of people don't realize is that that 1% probably had issues before they came to your place. And also too, the thing that a lot of our employees are saying is that everybody around them knows that they're an issue. Then why don't we do something about it? Remember, the 1% is notorious for just an outright lie. Also, too, what we're talking about is that the 1% will go up and walk up usually to the boss or the owner, and they'll know exactly what to say to spread these little half-truths and all this stuff on other employees. Because the only self-worth that they have is tearing other people down to make themselves feel better. And they're notorious with the negative rap. I'm going to ask y'all out there, do y'all think y'all got maybe 1% of the workforce that might be a little negative? And I'm going to ask you, do you think they're basically affecting how you feel, how your job is, and do you think they're affecting the customer? I guarantee you they're affecting our customer, indirectly or directly, because you can't turn it on like a switch. And that's where in the program, when we do these 2-year contracts, is that what happens is that we call it All-American in shorts. Basically, anybody can sit there and hit and practice, but when it gets into the game, it's a whole different deal. And also, too, is that anybody can be sweet, nice, or kind for a day, for 3 days, or 4 days. Remember that 1% is a tremendous manipulator. So they know when to turn the charm on and when to turn it off. And remember, and if you look at the folks that are around them, they don't have very close relationships. And what you're going to see is that they're here and here just for a very short time because they don't have the discipline internally, because they don't have the self-worth to sit here and be consistent and be a good person. They're manipulating. When I'm coming up to you and I'm being that just as sweet as pie to you and doing all that, then going around and kind of stabbing you in the old back, I can keep moving from one target to the next. And that's where we're saying in an informal organization is why they run rampant. Now, I want y'all to really think about that. Because if you look at it with the informal organization, there's nothing there that they can be held accountable. And remember, the 99% of the good folks, they're not going to say nothing. And the other interesting thing is that the 1%, you couldn't run them out of there until we start getting in the accountability. And what we're looking at is that it's not the management having to hold them accountable. As we start defining these base work centers, start moving things from an informal to a formal like order request, that's going to start tightening some things up, and they're not going to be able. And that's what able to manipulate. That's why in the program, what we're saying, and we'll talk about this story in a minute, it's called that funnel concept. The people and the employees based off of their past life, their last job, the environment at home, and all these other things here, basically don't trust the organization. And also too, the organization has dealt us some cards out there to help reinforce why we don't trust. And that is, well, all of a sudden we're saying we're going to close the doors every day at 5. Well, that lasts about 2 days, and now all of a sudden we're leaving it open till 6, and then somebody comes in and steals the computer, and then all of a sudden we go over and say, okay, we're going to start closing the thing at 5 again, and the whole circle starts again. So again, what we're looking at is that we really have to step back and look and focus on not only who we are, but look around us and look around at that 1% and look at how they're manipulating. So as the funnel concept comes down, see, they can't deal with consistency because consistency is against their nature. They can't be consistent other than just a sneak or a snob. That's basically it. They can't be consistent. So when the program, because they've outlasted, outmaneuvered everything in the organization that we've tried to implement. Because remember, that's what they're always working on. Most of us go to our corners and do our job. That person is continually manipulating the informal organizational structure and the people that are around it. Now remember, they're the first ones to wave the flag and say, I'm doing everything, I'm a company man, I'm doing what I can to help you, They ain't doing nothing but manipulating everybody to get what they want. So as the funnel concept comes down, that's why we start getting them somewhere around the 12th to 17th month. We're talking about the 20%. See, the 20% will start jumping on board because the negative influence here, these folks, the other 19% are starting to see the consistency and starting to see the accountability. So they're going, okay, and plus we've also had some training and awareness. Because you wouldn't believe when we get in here that a lot of people are having these 1% just hound on us all day and we don't realize it. They're sitting there tricking us to think that they're really helping the company out. So all of a sudden it's really kind of neat when we get into these companies and we start reading the stories, the 1%, the negative things. All of a sudden it's like they start seeing themselves, and it's like all of a sudden we're looking at that 1% and everybody kind of knows it, and we're like, oh my goodness, they're talking about me, or they're looking at that, and it puts them on alert. That's why they start jumping in the other 19%. So the base character we want to look at as the 20%, we're saying they'll move from a negative down to a positive. Let's look at the number 1. It says forgive. For myself, let's forget, meaning let's not carry that thing around. Because if we're carrying that luggage, all of a sudden we just keep adding it, and all it's going to do is eat us up inside, and then we'll start, number 1, attacking our friends, our family, the co-workers, and the whole bit. So we're saying here from a positive standpoint, from the base character, be the one to forget. Don't sit there and carry a grudge and do all that, because all that's doing is eating you up. Remember in your heart that you're the good person. You've basically threw another brick in that integrity foundation, and that person's going to get whatever they deserve down the road. But let's not let them basically manipulate us and make us spend time, energy, and effort on me feeling bad about what they did or they got over on us, because eventually they'll land somewhere and it's not going to be on their feet. And if we look at it, the other thing is from how we project to others. That is forgiveness. We want to be able to forgive, even if that's that negative 1%, even if they've done bad things time in and time out. We need to forgive them and move on. Because remember, when an informal organization and all these skill issues, there's nothing you're going to do other than get in an argument. And we're saying we have to be the better person. We have to be the bigger person. This is why we're saying as we tighten up the organizational structure, I'm not going to say it's like putting a rat in a box, but basically as the box gets lower, that rat can't go nowhere. And so this is what's going to happen here as we build the organizational structure. And every time, every organization we have ever gone into over 11 years, the 1% have left. We've never had to fire them because they cannot deal with the consistency and the accountability issues that their co-workers are now holding them accountable. And remember, I hate those seminars that we talk about, oh, make sure, how do we make our people accountable? Nah, people want to be accountable. They want to do what's right. So we really need to focus on what we can do as individuals that are not only going to help us, but also help our workplace, that'll also help our home life. And this is a constant thing that I have to keep working on, because it's really tough to go home and think about, you'll say, we say 7 negatives, or we'll remember 7 negatives for every positive. We also speak 7 negatives. So it's a constant thing that we have to get out of those habits. And with the baseless character, what are we looking at with the 1%? Kind of to the 20% there, and that is that where we're forgiving, they're holding a grudge, and they're hateful, and they're sitting around at the break room or in the coffee thing before and after work, and all they're talking about is how you're the worst thing in the world. And they carry a grudge, and they take that with them. And I've seen it actually, employees that have had a grudge for 30 years with a company. I just wonder what it would look like if you looked inside, what it would be. It'd have to be all kind of crinkled up and stuff. I don't know how you could be kind of whole carrying around all that grudge and all that hate and all that worry, that they're really eating away at themselves. We don't have to do nothing to them. And every time we're the bigger person, man, that just infuriates them. They can't stand it because they're used to manipulating you to a response that usually gets you in trouble. Because remember, they don't have an issue with just an outright lie. Now let's look at number 2, which is humble. Now this is kind of a neat thing here. We're talking about being humble. Now, we ain't heard that word in a while, especially in the 80s. And especially in the 90s, greed is good and all that other kind of junk, and being humble. What we're saying here is that we've been kind of told if we don't step up and if we're not the loudest and if we're not doing this and that, that people are going to take advantage of us. People are going to take advantage no matter what you do. It's like writing a contract. You need to look at who you're doing business with, because I don't care how, and I've been in a ton of contracts, believe me. And if you look at that, the contract is only as good as the people that are in it. Now, y'all think about that. And we're talking about here being humble. Just what we're saying is that we have to really step back, take our ego out of it, take our pride and all this other junk, and we really have to humble ourselves. Meaning that we're, in effect, what we're saying, serving others. And we're saying serving others is doing what we can help whenever we can help, to put people's concerns on our front plate. But look at it, how we kind of turn to where it's me, 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 and we're even carrying that same attitude over with our kids. I've actually got some folks that we know that do nothing but kind of treat their kids as some distant relatives, and all of a sudden they're doing whatever they want, and the kids are kind of doing what they want, and then all of a sudden we've had that responsibility for those kids, and we're treating them like they're adults, and we're treating them like they're a third party, where in effect what we're saying is that we need to all be a part and serve and help and put people on as a priority in our life. Because believe me, when you're giving and serving others, you get it back tenfold. And if you look at the baseless characteristic, conceit, snob, insecure. So when we're looking at being humbling and serving others, that 1%, think of what being conceited. We used to say that all times when we were kids. We always usually had that pretty person in school that kind of always looked good and always had good clothes and their hair was always right. They're always walking around, got everything new out of Target, and well, they didn't even have Target when I was in school. But if you look at it, they're always looking good. And it seems like they always kind of went around with their nose up in the air. Now, where do you think these people end up? They end up at work. So if you look at this, the snob, the insecurity, reason I'm a snob, because I get my strength of making you feel bad. And so we're looking at here the conceitness, being a snob, the insecurity. The reason I have to do that is build my self-worth up by tearing you down. Self-control, that's very important. Look at most of the issues that we've gotten in problems, or in problems whether it's at work or at home. We've lost control. We need to really work on self-control that in turn give us patience. Anybody got any kids? Patience. Step back, and it's the patience of, I was helping my daughter, we were making a cake, I forgot what it was, and she's up there stirring that thing, she turns the blender on, and all of a sudden that stuff goes everywhere and the bowl spins across the cabinet. My first instinct was to grab that bowl and do it myself. I have to have patience and show her and help her through that. Is that no difference in what we're talking about at work? Is that no difference in what we're talking about life? The baseless character, that negative person, they're always in a hurry and they're short-tempered. They're always on the move. They always make you think they're the busiest things in the world. And what's interesting, the big-time CEOs out there, whether they have, what I'm meaning big time is that they have a lot of integrity, whether they have 5 employees, 10 employees, 1,000, 10,000. You know what's interesting? They always have time. They always are able to meet or to help or to do. They always seem to schedule their time. Now that's interesting. When you go down through the organization, we're getting just the opposite. But the guy at the top has been able to do it. How do you think they got there? They've been under control, self-control, with discipline. Look at the consistency. Again, consistency, doing what we say we're going to do day in and day out, that in turn, we start trusting. People start trusting, and we start trusting people. And the other way is the extreme negative is that it's extreme and it's inconsistent. Inconsistency means that we're doing it one day, not the next. Compassion, kindness. Compassion, kindness. Anger, negative rap. Generosity, and sharing. Giving and helping people and being a generous person. On the other hand, it's greed and never enough. Now y'all think about that. We all have some in our families that no matter what they get, they buy a new car, that's good enough for about a month, and they got to buy another house, and they got to go get a new set of trash cans or whatever it is. They're never satisfied. If you look at it, they're having to fill a void because the void's in here and in here. So they're always having to keep grabbing something to do and to take to give them happiness. We're saying the happiness is right here, and it's just as easy to be happy as it is sad or positive or negative. But we picked up a lot of these bad habits out there. The self-worth is that we're looking at respect. When we have self-worth, we're giving respect to others because we're not having to tear somebody down to make us feel better. And over on the 1%, it's bitter and negative. Do any of y'all know anybody like that? No matter what happens, you give them a sack of money, they complain about it. It ain't big enough, ain't the right bills, whatever you want to say. Work ethic. I don't care. And another thing I don't like out there in these schools, we got to work. 93 to 97% of us have got to have a good work ethic. We've got to do, and what we're doing when we're there, we got to give all we can. I don't care if you don't like your boss, you don't like your company, you still have to live up to your integrity and character and do the best that you can, because if you're doing the right things, opportunities will seek you, and you will get other opportunities out there. It might not be that week or that month, but y'all remember we talked about patience? When we have that work ethic, we're looking at able to help others, and the negative is lazy, they avoid, and they make excuses. Y'all think about that. Can any of y'all think at the other company of someone that fits that? They're a little lazy, always delegating off or trying to get people to do their work. Avoidance. They don't want to really be involved, but they're sitting there telling what you got to do, and then they always have an excuse for everything under the sun. Have you ever known anybody that went to the doctor about 30 times a month? They always had an urgency. They always had an emergency. They always had something wrong in their life. That cloud's following them along. It's going to be raining on them their whole life, and they like for it to share it with everybody else. So let's look at the life lessons. The strength and or power of character of the person is not taking advantage of the disadvantage, but giving what's fair. When it comes down to it, we have to do what's right. And even if we have the advantage, we have to be fair and do what's right. Because guess what? Sometimes our kids are looking at us. Sometimes our neighbors are looking at us. Sometimes our co-workers are looking at us. That's how we build character, and that's how we build trust. You get out of life what you give to others, and what you give comes back in abundance. So what we're saying there, you really get out of life what you put into it. And what you're giving others, I guarantee you it's going to come back in abundance. So if you're giving a bunch of negative stuff out there, you might get by on all of us for a year, 6 months, 10 years, or whatever. But believe me, you're eventually going to pay for it. You've got to do what's right. Positive thoughts promote constructive communication with oneself and others. If we're thinking negative and all humped up and bowed up, believe me, everything that's coming out is going to be negative. So what we're saying here is let's think positive thoughts. And if we get a negative thought in there, let's displace it with a positive. And we have to really watch out, like what we have been talking about before, like with that negative rap, because it kind of gets into a habit. Now let's look at the next page, because we're going to be looking at the workplace. We're looking at focusing on us and ourselves and the things that we need to do. Let's look at on the process improvement, the workplace profile improvement. We're looking at that, the people. Okay, we're saying the workplace profile. We talked about this before. There's people, personality, process, procedure, system, and the managing, planning, scheduling, and monitoring of all that stuff. Look at the people. What is it that improves the base values? Personality, quality characteristics. This is what we were talking about a minute ago. Process, defining the process and the steps. Procedure, writing procedures for the process and step. Systems, linking process defines systems. As we break the organization down, then we have the manage, plan, schedule, and monitor. And it says to manage, plan, schedule, and monitor with prevention and corrective actions. This is what we're talking about. We got to get proactive, just like taking control of our life. We can sit there and, man, we all know somebody that goes from one tragedy to the next. What we got to do is run from that person as fast as we can, because their life's not going to change. And if you try to help them, and that's what we should do, but it gets to a point to where people have to help themselves. And the sad thing is, I've been through kind of a lot of stuff. A lot of people aren't going to help themselves until they have no other alternatives. And that is until they're down and out in their luck, and then they have nothing else to turn to. And then all of a sudden they're going to seek help. The 4 barriers to quality, and we all have some of those in our family, don't we? Well, some don't. Most of folks I know do. Fear of expression and or action, lack of communication, verbal and or written, lack of procedure, and lack of training, formalized. So we're looking at how do the 4 barriers affect this. The workforce has daily interactions with the 4 barriers to quality. If you look at the dysfunction of the 4 barriers, it cost us a ton of money. Not only a ton of money, but a ton of this reserve, this strength that we're building up internally. Okay, now let's look at the 4 barriers to quality findings. You can't train until you have written procedure that has been written by the person doing the job. You can't have written procedure without open and honest communication. You can't have open and honest communication without removing the fear of expression or action. The workplace profile, continuous improvement. Step 1, we need to deal with the issues. And now remember, the 1%, this negative influence, they're masters at dealing with everything but tangible things, because they have nothing, they ain't going to do nothing. They're been able to yank our chain literally with emotional feedback. Deal with data, deal and not with data and not emotion. And that's a tough thing for us. What do we want to do? You know, in my whole life I grew up in sports, and it was like, you either win or lose. You either whip them or they whip you. So it was really kind of tough for me once I got out, was to sit and simmer down and not look at the emotional thing, whereas how I had always tried to, and that's probably, I guess, what made me a successful athlete, was that basically the emotional thing is that I dealt with the emotional thing. Now I have to step back and deal with data. And dealing with data is simmering down, setting the emotion. That's why that base character stuff is so important. And what we're asking you to do there is just take it and read it and look at it. Keep it with you, because that's how we're going to change or have an impact or an improvement, and we're calling that an affirmation. Step 3, define the process, steps, and procedure. The personal issue will usually disappear and/or the quality issue. As we're defining the process, step, and procedure, remember, by the people doing the job, whatever quality issues we have, we'll start putting them away. All right, now let's look at the story Smile. And the life lesson at the bottom is a good positive attitude in the morning sets the tone for a good positive day. Now, in fact, I was given a self-help book. Now it's been like 20-something years ago. And what was interesting is that I was given that self-help book by probably one of the biggest crooks I ever known in my life, and talking all that junk. And you see a lot of those people talking that trash and they don't live it. Well, they'll soon flush up. And one of the interesting things that I looked at is that it said that you could either be positive or negative. Well, that's my interpretation. It's probably said a lot better now. But literally, we have that decision that we can either be positive or negative, happy or sad. And this smile is what we try to do. A smile in the morning improves life every day. When you get out, really, they are saying, even when we're working in sales and cold calling and all that, they say get your feet flat on the ground, kind of set up straight, put a smile on your face, because that'll come across. And what we're saying here is that it's just as easy to smile, to have a good day, and to be positive as it is negative. But remember, if we're dealing with all these personal issues over here, it's kind of tough to get to smiling. That's why we've got to look and focus on these base character issues. And see, what I had to do, my biggest problem was moving from the athletic field to where you either won or lost by whipping somebody, is that I had to be able to step back and set my ego aside, and basically, maybe that person got over on me that day. And believe me, I've been gotten over by more than anybody you can ever imagine. But I've always come out of it. And one particular deal out there in California took 10 years, but it came back in spades. If you look at this, we're really talking about doing what's right, focusing on yourself, focusing on the things that you can do to help you. By helping yourself, you're going to take control of the environment around you. And let's look at page number 4, being a good neighbor. And this was an interesting thing. When we first wrote the book, some of these folks come at us and said we couldn't put that in the business book, being a good neighbor. And the life lesson is, given the opportunity to help, people will help one another. I don't care what happens. The majority of the people, why do you see it seems like tragedy brings people together? Because it gives people an opportunity to help. Being a good neighbor, example, I think when I saw this, I was thinking about it. I was in fact, I think I was in Washington, and I saw this Ted Turner broadcast, or whatever it is, news station, CNN, and it actually showed a hillside there in Alabama, and that what had happened, a tornado come through and tore all the porches off and threw some houses down and all that. And what they were talking about is that just as soon as that happened, and people were coming out of their houses and in their communities from neighboring communities to do what they could to help. And see, and this is what we're saying about being a good neighbor. That applies at work. But let's not just wait till there's a tragedy. Let's be a good neighbor every day. And remember, how do we be a good neighbor? We're looking at all these personal issues that we're dealing with, becoming secure in who we are, and really building that faith that what we are doing is right. And believe it or not, what's in here is going to tell you what's right, and whether we want to admit it or not. And that's when we do something wrong, like going there and swipe some icing off the cake when nobody's looking. We know in here, we might be able to get by with, that's what we call that conscience, or that thing that eats at us. Let's look at the next story, and it is 7-to-1 positive. And the life lesson is, a lesson learned from a negative experience is positive. If we look at it, we have such a big tendency to focus on the negative. And I realized as I was going through these companies that we will remember almost 7-to-1 negative events of what we will a positive. Now, isn't that interesting? And I believe why we do that is because, in effect, it's almost fear. For the fact is, if it's negative, means something could happen to us. Well, if it's positive, we kind of been taught to kind of accept it and move on. What we're saying, let's take it and turn it around and remember 7 positives and discount that negative and move on. Because again, that's what's going to help us get through. And you would not believe of what tragedies happen that people are able to move through that. But the best way to move through that tragedy or something, that negative event, is to either fix it or forget it and move on. And if you can't do nothing about it, don't drag that dead horse along with you. Move on and get on down the road. So let's look at this. When we're having a negative, basically we're storing something negative, discount, put it out and then put something positive in there. Think of the positive part of it. Number 6 is affirmation. And this is another little personal thing here. This is one of the stories that we talked about, and I think we talked about it in one of our earlier classes, that really come into hold right here, especially in this, when we get to section 5 and stuff, is that if you look at this affirmation, they're saying an affirmation is repeating something to help change a habit, and repeating that 2 to 3 times a day. It takes like 6 or 8, 9 months to change that habit. That's what they're saying, an affirmation, continually focusing on that. So what we're doing is kind of laying out some stuff for us to be in front of us and to be thinking about what are those things that we can work on. The affirmation says the path of change is taken a step at a time and measured in miles and months. Nothing's going to happen overnight. Where this affirmation thing that really got me thinking about it, especially as I was going into these big companies, and they're flying all this stuff out to these seminars and wanting to change the company or be a world-class manufacturer in 2 weeks, is that I'm going, man, or change the organization. That story was when we were kids, my brothers and I'd go to town. My mom would take us into town. And one of the stories is that the rules were not to spit on the sidewalk in town. Well, we were 8, 6, and 5, and you can imagine what we did as kids. First thing when your mama tells you, we'd spit on the sidewalk. What she would do is pop us in back of the head, and what we now look at it, that was a positive affirmation. So before too many pops on the head, we quit spitting on the sidewalk. So we're saying something as simple as not spitting on the sidewalk, that takes 8 to 9 months, how are you going to change an organization in a month, in a quarter, in a year, in 2 years? And every time you add another employee on it, it compounds this thing. So if you look at it, when you're thinking that you're going to be able to paint the trucks, get new uniforms, move to a new facility, and everything's going to change, that's why that profile of leadership comes in. So an affirmation is, and these are one of the things, when we go back to this base character thing, and look at what are some of these things that we can focus on. I personally have really been focusing on patience, because I kind of never really had much patience, and that's one of the things that I really try to work on personally. So that's a good list to kind of keep around. Okay, now let's look at, as we're talking about internally within the organization, looking at addressing these issues. How can I fix my organization? How can I get out of some of these conflict issues? How can I take care of that 1%? How can I come out of it without having to go home and like pour me a drink or something? If you look at this, this is really a good way, is that if as an individual or as a department manager or manager, if we have a quality issue and it's in violation of the 2 rules, or it can be people, process, or procedure, here's a good way that kind of takes it away from the personal side and starts putting it into a process side and data, is that really look at what is that particular issue. Here's an audit. You can go all the way down, and all these issues here from A to E, the 4 barriers to quality, the processing and supporting of really our order request, MPSM, and the 4 M's, and the workplace profile, I don't care what problem you got. They're going to be in there somewhere. And we would like for you to rate it. Is that like lack of procedure, is that a big concern? Is that like a 5? Or what is it? So what we're looking at here is that I would even randomly sample. I would actually go in and try to set up monthly or quarterly to do a little simple quality audit like that. Because if you do that, then because of the fear in the organization, when you go in to do something like that, not everybody's going to panic and wonder what you're up to. So if you make it a part of the business and you make it a part of the way that we're doing business, and that's what we're saying, what we discovered is by putting it in writing and reinforcing it daily and living it, it became a part of the organization. And I've actually seen it happen. So if we're looking at this, make that a part of maybe whether it's quarterly, annually, or whatever. Just make a decision. If you make a decision you're going to do it monthly, quarterly, annually, or once every 10 years, do it once every 10 years, because the consistency promotes truth, that promotes trust. Also, now let's look at, even if we're having some conflict with our boss, we want to look at being able to take a proactive approach to it, not attack them, because we have a tendency to dump stuff and say, it's a problem, you need to fix it. What we need to do is step back and say, hey, I've done a personal audit on this process. This is kind of what I'm seeing. What I'd like to do is to look at how in the world could we develop a system for this particular thing. Here's that system workshop. This thing here will help you lay out by your base work center to look at, to start defining or coming to an agreement. And especially if you're dealing with that 1%. This is a good way, because they're going to sit there, they'll never participate. They'll say they will, but they ain't going to do nothing. Is that by defining the process and the system and working with your boss and your co-workers, come to an agreement. But you have to lead it and make it happen. It's really tough for an employee without their management's direction. So what we're saying here is that if you're a manager, we want you to make this a part of how you're doing business, because it also makes it an easy way to address these issues. And if you're looking at this, if you're doing it and it's acceptable in your division or your department, then it's okay for anybody in the organization. And again, maybe schedule a meeting once a quarter, once a month to look at our systems. And if you got a problem next time, say, hey man, have you filled out let's maybe look at a systems development form. Let's see why that thing's messing up. But what you'll see is that we'll never take the time to do it. We'll just keep putting the fire out. That's why we're running anywhere from 33, I think statistically it's like 33% inefficient for all these things that we're having to do over and do again or having to wait on. And if you look at the next page is the action item. Now this is action item quick action. This is really a good way to help take care of a lot of issues that we're addressing day to day. Is that let's make that a policy. Because remember, we've talked about throughout this applied business science is to look at the internal order request, or the external order, the internal request. We're saying here, if we're asking of something from another department, asking something from a co-worker, we're saying let's write it down. And if we're going to fix something or do something, we can use that as a quick action. Meaning we agree on what we got to do, assign out who's going to do it, and then we're going to do it. Now we're able to manage, plan, schedule, and monitor it. So particularly if I'm having an issue with a coworker or another department, maybe this is the form that we could use. A very simple form here, very simple process to look at this thing and literally go, okay, every time I go over that department, I don't get what I want. I talk to them, they act like they ain't heard me, and all of a sudden it's 2 weeks later and now my back's up against a wall. Write an action item. Write it down and take it to them. Say, when can you have it done? This is one of the first things that we do in an organization. When we go in, everybody kind of sits around and everybody, sincerely in their heart, we're masters at procrastination. All of us are. And so what happens here is that I'll go, okay, now can you like move that coffee cup to the other side? Oh yeah, I can do that. I said, when can you do that? They go, because we have to get that commitment on here. They're going, oh, I can do that in, I don't know, maybe 1 hour, 1 day. I said, what if we were to give you 5 days? Could you do that? And every time they go, oh yeah, we can do that, what happens is, you know when we end up getting it done, if we do get it done? The 5th day, the 23rd hour, because that's kind of habit. And plus, the majority of the time, we have never been held accountable for any of this stuff, or we've never followed up. This is where all the inconsistency things that have happened internally within the organization. So if you're looking at just by doing this and starting to set habit and accountability, so if you're having some issues, use this quality issue form here. This action item form. Now let's look at the process and step. Remember, we looked at a system thing here a minute ago. If you look at the system, what we want to do is look at the process and step. So if we're looking at doing a system, we want to make sure that we're defining the process and step of that particular system or whatever it is that we're addressing. So remember, the process and step is literally just like flow charting. So we just want to put that thing down there. So we want to make sure we use that process and step. Why? Because we want to formalize that particular system. Why? Because that's where we have problems in an informal organization, which in turn starts backing up a lot of stuff and bringing a lot of things to head. And what you're looking at is that if you really look at what we're talking about and have been doing, we're really addressing all the tough issues that most organizations don't address. That's the 4 barriers to quality and holding accountable for basically doing what's right. Because remember why? We don't address conflict or we address it with conflict. So if you look at this, these things build up and these habits continue on in the organization. Next is, let's look at page number 12. That's a base work center procedures, what we call thought process. This will help you. If you see on that form, there's some things about whatever that particular procedure, who's going to manage, plan, schedule, and monitor it? How are we going to manage it? How are we going to plan it? What are the things that have to be done in order to make sure that thing's a success? So if you look at, this is a good thing for us to do here in our thought process. Now, what we're doing here is that I think what you're going to start seeing is that how important these 4 barriers and everything that we're doing, because everything that we're doing over these 30-hour certificate program in this applied business science keeps coming back to the same issues. But what we're doing is pulling this huge complex curriculum apart and basically saying, here's the skills, you can use it here, you can use it here, you can use it here. This is why we're saying the base skills are so important and are transferable. Once we learn how to write a process and step, no matter if we're addressing issue or going in to fix a system, it's all the same stuff because everything evolves around those 4 barriers. 98% of the problems in the organization does. And if you look at this, this is what we're saying here of why it's so important for the base skills to move down through the organization. And everybody should have these base skills. All right, now let's look at frequently asked questions. What is a base characteristic? What we're talking about here, it's basically what we need to step back and look at. What does it take to be a quality person? You've got to form in your workshop. We really want you to go back because what was interesting, we talk about all this quality stuff, but we never talked about the people, and we never talked about the quality of what we're supposed to do or how there were really no guidelines or there was really no emphasis put on that. And what was frustrating to me, it seemed like the 1% just kept getting worse and worse and just aggravating everybody around, and they were never really getting addressed. And as these last 11 years, we now realize why all this stuff is going on. Describe a quality character or characteristic. What we're looking at here, quality character, is that you're really doing the right thing for the right reason. Even if we take a cheap shot to the chin, we're still retaining our integrity. We're still doing the good things day in and day out. We're not taking advantage of people. We're giving, we're helping. We're focusing on us, we're focusing on our families, we're focusing on doing what's right. And the character issue is that even when it's not going good, that we don't sit there and poor mouth it and we don't share our miseries with everybody. And what we do is take it and build our integrity internally. That in turn builds our strength. And it says, what do you mean by forgive, forget, and forge on? Man, you can carry that sack of rocks around with you all day long. Is it going to help? No. All it's going to do is get heavier, because once you carry in that sack, you keep throwing other bricks in there. And we have a tendency to let this stuff build up. So what we're having to do is that we have to forgive, forget, and move on, even if it's at 1%. Because what we're doing indirectly, they're taking control of our emotions and who we are by getting us upset. We have to be calm, because they're not used to dealing with calmness. They're used to be dealing with emotion and sneakiness and all this snotty stuff. They're not used to dealing. And then every time we retain our integrity, it just aggravates them that much more. And they want to go stick their hand in a briar bush or something to make it hurt even worse. So what we're looking at here is retain our integrity, because the person that we're having these issues with have lost theirs. Does that mean we need to sacrifice ours? No. Because every time that situation happens, we have to be able to turn around and walk off and know that we were the bigger person. And I don't know where all this stuff came from, but what was interesting, it does take a heck of a lot more guts to turn away and walk away from a fight or an issue than it is to fight. I know that, because that's what I used to do all the time, is just fight. So if you look at this, be the bigger person. Why is patience so important? Because if you look at it, really patience is a form of discipline. Patience is really a form of self-worth. Patience is really self-confidence. Because if we have the patience, we have all that other stuff. Because the reason we don't have patience, because we're not secure in ourselves and in the issue. If we are humble in serving and giving to others, won't we be taken advantage of and lose by giving? I won't have anything left for myself. You know, really what we're looking at here is that we're talking about serving others and helping other people and being the good citizen. If we're looking at here, believe me, somewhere in your life, it might not be that week or next, you'll have abundance of goodness. And if nothing else, you wake up in the morning, you got nothing but a ton of friends around you. What is life all about? We're saying here, you really do get out of life what you put into it. And every time that we're the bigger person, just gives us a couple of extra steps up. What is a snob? We all know what a snob is. And y'all look at it. That snob never smiles. They're always kind of cranky looking. Describe the difference between a baseless character and a base character. Basically, if you look at it, they'll lie to you in a heartbeat, and the other person has the integrity. The 1%, while we put it real big, I want y'all to be thinking about when you leave here out that 1%. And don't let them people aggravate you or take control of who you are and of your integrity. Stay fast and have that belief and confidence in yourself that long term it will pay off. I'm not saying we're doing it to get this big reward. We want y'all to really focus on looking at how to address these issues without conflict and take control of your base work center. Give you a lot to think about. And thanks, and have a good day, and see you at our next class.